Welcome to the Just Ingredients podcast. I'm Cara Lynn, and here we talk all things nourishing to the mind, body, and soul. This is a place where you can find just good ingredients to life. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Today, I have a guest, Lucan Aoun, who is joining us all the way from Australia, and I actually have wanted him on our show for such a long time. So I'm excited that he's here today. He is an expert supplement formulator, a fully qualified naturopath with hundreds of thousands of people around the world tuning into his content. And today he is going to help us understand the role of testosterone for both men and women, because so many of you ask me on a daily basis about this. So we have got the expert here to teach us all the things. So thank you, Lucan, for being here.
Yeah, I'm really excited, Carolyn. I mean, it's been a long time in the making, but definitely really excited to chat all things testosterone and hopefully, tremendously benefit your audience.
Well, before we delve into that topic, will you tell my listeners just a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. So, I mean, my journey really started out actually trying to become a professional soccer player. From a very young age, I was very keen and excited to, really make it to the English Premier League. And during my journey, I actually started working in my father's pharmacy. So my dad's a pharmacist, and I was getting experience learning about different supplements and vitamins and like understanding how they work and doing a lot of research. And that led me to my naturopathy degree, which I completed, as a 4-year Bachelor of Health Science degree. Absolutely loved it. I ended up becoming getting the ducks, so the highest grades in my year level. Obviously, I'm a book nerd. And yeah, from there, I really basically from there, Carolyn, as I built out an Instagram profile, a YouTube channel, just to showcase new, unique, and novel health information that no one else was talking about. So I guess that's sort of what I'm known for these days is like Australia's leading biohacker sharing new and novel health information.
You do share a lot of fun tips and great education on your site. And so, yeah, let's just delve right into testosterone if you're okay with that. Let's first just like start at the beginning and the basics and maybe say why testosterone is even important or what it is. I think we all know it's a hormone, but what beyond that?
Absolutely. So testosterone is a sex steroid hormone. And when we look at that particular hormone, what we need to realize is that just like with many of the hormones in the human body, testosterone exerts pleiotropic effects, meaning that it can target different tissues and different organs. And it's extremely important for improving mood, motivation, and also energy. So this is oftentimes a misconception that testosterone is just to, build muscle and makes men aggressive. Um, this is not actually the case. In fact, testosterone is extremely important for maintaining healthy mood and general cognitive function as well.
And so is it doing the same thing for both men and women, like building the muscle and energy and mood, or is it different for men versus women?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it does appear to actually have a similar effect across men and women. So in terms of supporting strength and building muscle and helping with recovery, testosterone is going to be extremely crucial because what it does is it actually turns on this pathway known as protein synthesis. So it actually helps to stimulate the release of hormones that actually help with muscle protein synthesis.
Oh, okay. So why then do men need more testosterone? Just because they're a bigger build with more muscle?
That's one component. Then another thing would be like the biological interdifferences between the two. So, from a reproductive standpoint, obviously testosterone is important for sperm health, also maintaining secondary sexual characteristics. So obviously, it's going to have a crucial role there in terms of healthy libido, healthy reproductive function as well.
I want to talk about men and then women. When they are deficient, because I know there's so many men and women right now out there that are deficient in testosterone. So let's start with men. How do men know that they're deficient in testosterone, or what are some of their signs?
The most common symptoms that we see and typical signs would be that they're feeling fatigued all the time. They're having difficulty losing weight. They're struggling with a low libido or low sex drive. They're potentially not waking up with an erection. So, like morning wood, that's an important signal. And then also, if we look at some other signs and symptoms, it could be difficulty recovering after a workout. So if they do a workout, they feel like they're completely zonked and depleted and they just can't recover. Testosterone is really important for that recovery phase as well. So these are the typical sort of signs and symptoms that we see amongst men suffering from. It could be a subclinical low testosterone. So, for example, when a guy goes to their doctor, um, what can happen is that their testosterone might be on the very low end of the reference range, but that would can still be considered normal. And I'm sure you've seen this with thyroid panels and other hormones as well.
I've heard many doctors say it's considered the normal range, but not the optimal range, and we wanna look for the optimal range. Okay, so are those symptoms similar for a woman to know that they're low in testosterone?
So for a woman, it's much more like less likely that they're going to be low in testosterone. It's usually a lot of the other hormones, such as progesterone or estrogen or thyroid hormones. So they're like, and also potentially cortisol when we're looking at HPA axis dysfunction. So I guess in women, it definitely is a little bit of a different sort of ratio, different balance of these different hormones.
Okay, so that's really interesting because I have a lot of women friends that I know take testosterone. Some have done the pellets, some do a cream, things like that. And so in my circle of friends, I feel like every woman is low in testosterone, but you don't really think that's the case.
Not necessarily. I mean, the thing is, I personally, I don't really seem to work closely with a lot of women. Most men are the ones that are messaging me wanting coaching and consulting. But usually, what I hear from that side is they're more so interested in decreasing prolactin, increasing progesterone, and balancing estrogen. And having said all that, testosterone can be extremely life changing for women as well. When they start on testosterone, sometimes it can restore libido, can help with strength, can help with recovery, and also with energy as well.
Okay, so we'll come back to the women because I do have a lot of questions about that. But I do want to ask, why do you think testosterone is dropping in so many men and in women?
So definitely, if we look at the literature, obesity seems to be a leading culprit behind why testosterone levels are plummeting. But then, if we look outside of just general body fat, we need to factor in the environment. It's very obvious that there's, um, a massive amount of exposure to these endocrine disrupting chemicals in our environment. I mean, you've done a phenomenal job at educating, your listeners about avoiding these harmful chemicals. The same applies if we're trying to maintain testosterone output. Things like BPA, these other types of plastics, and even, funnily enough, wearing polyester underwear. That one there can actually be devastating for men. In particular, can actually, in some cases, lead to up to 90% reduction in fertility in men.
Wow.
So
Wow.
this is a really significant drop.
Yeah, I was just seeing the other day online a company that sells 100% organic men, like boxers and briefs, and they were saying that the owner found out he had this issue with polyester underwear when he was in the sauna and realized, oh, when I'm sweating and my pores are opening, but I'm wearing these boxer briefs, that stuff is seeping into the pores of my skin, possibly.
Yeah, that's devastating. And then also, I mean, sort of playing along that picture there is like heat exposure. So literally just talking about the temperature of a man's testes if it's too warm all the time. For example, if they're wearing very tight underwear or if they've got a laptop on their lap or if they're in a really hot environment all the time, the sheer fact of the heat can damage testicular functioning. that is the reason why the testicles hang outside the male body. It's because they need to be kept cooler than the core body temperature. And so, what I'm really well known for, Carolyn, it's funny because I popularized a particular lifestyle change that can boost testosterone levels in men, and that is actually applying an ice pack up against the underwear, which can cool down the testes, and that can help with testosterone production.
Interesting. That is really interesting. I wonder if most men know, like, "Oh, I shouldn't get too hot down there or it's gonna cause issues?"
No, in fact, a lot of guys have no idea about this, and I mean, your average doctor's not really going to be discussing this. This requires high level understanding of physiology.
So, do you think stress also plays a role in lower testosterone levels?
Yep. So that's a great point there, Carolyn. So stress, because we're looking at the HPA axis, the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, what can happen is the body can shift its resources away from the reproductive side and more towards the fight or flight system. So helping with cortisol synthesis. And so it makes sense because if we look at the two branches of the autonomic nervous system, you've probably discussed this as well before, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. I like to look at the parasympathetic nervous system as the rest, sex, and digest part of the nervous system, whereas the sympathetic is the fight, flight, or freeze part of the nervous system. So that's not freezing the testes. I mean, for frozen. Yeah. Yeah.
We should implement that new terminology. That's the first time I've heard it as rest, sex, and digest. Usually it's just rest and digest, but that makes sense. And so when we're stressing, our adrenals are pumping out that cortisol rather than the testosterone, correct?
Yeah, exactly. So what happens is there's actually something called an antagonistic relationship between cortisol and testosterone, which means that when cortisol levels are elevated, which is the primary stress hormone in both men and women, when that hormone is elevated, that can suppress the higher up pathways that increase testosterone. So it can actually put the handbrakes on testosterone production.
Interesting. Okay, so you touched upon obesity being an issue with testosterone, but we didn't really delve into why. Why is that?
Great question. So when we're looking at obesity, that's excess adipocytes or fat cells. And what can happen in the body is really interesting. Testosterone in the human body, if it's susceptible to an enzyme called aromatase. Now, aromatase converts testosterone into estrogen. Now, the higher the body fat percentage, the more rampant and the more, I guess, like hungry that enzyme is. So that what happens
Hmm.
is the body then over converts testosterone into estrogen, and that's actually lowering testosterone because we're getting a much greater conversion into estrogen.
Interesting. So if you see an obese person, can you just assume that their estrogen is too high?
Let's just put it this way. I've looked at, hundreds of different blood test results over the years. And for the guys that are carrying an excess amount of body fat, I've never seen a guy that has, heavy, like a lot of body fat and have high testosterone at the same time. It's very, very unlikely.
So can nutrient deficiencies also play a role in lower testosterone or not necessarily?
Yeah, so this is a great point. So various nutrients such as magnesium, boron, zinc, and some other flavonoids as well can lead to a reduction in the overall functioning of the testes. So what can happen is if we're seeing a major deficiency in, let's say, zinc, that can affect fertility. It can help affect sperm health and also affect testosterone. And so, what I always recommend is we obviously want to try and get most of these nutrients from our diet. This is including highly bioavailable food sources. So, organ meats, plenty of fresh fruits and vegetables, like a whole diverse sort of diet. But obviously, in some cases, when we look at blood work, we sometimes need to fill in the gap with certain nutrients. So we might need to supplement with zinc, we might need to supplement with boron, magnesium, and things of that nature.
Well, that's interesting that magnesium plays a role because I had a doctor on that said, "You want to know how you know if you're low in magnesium?" And he said, "If you have a pulse, you're low in magnesium." That's a lot of men maybe struggling and women struggling with their testosterone.
Definitely. And so with the magnesium as well, the RDI, the recommended daily intake for magnesium is it's like 400 milligrams for men. And so this is very difficult to achieve through diet alone. Like unless you're eating extremely rich magnesium rich foods, it's a bit of a challenge to actually hit that RDI of magnesium.
Yeah, it is. Okay, so I know a bunch of guys out there who are always trying to boost their testosterone. So, are there ways to boost it? Like, I mean, if they obviously get rid of these nutritional deficiencies, but are there certain herbs they can take or certain foods they should focus on, or what can people do?
Yeah, so this was a question that I was getting asked quite a lot on my Instagram DMs, and I was starting to realize that okay, many people are looking up to me to understand what can they supplement with, how can they eat, what are the strategies that they can implement to boost testosterone levels naturally. Now, bear in mind, a lot of people that would approach me uh, have decided against TRT, so they don't want to go down the synthetic route, and they want to try and boost levels as high as possible naturally. And the good thing is, there are many different strategies that can help with maintaining high levels of testosterone. And I'm a good example of this because one of my goals a few years ago was to see how high I can take my testosterone naturally. And I ended up taking it just shy of 1,000 nanograms per deciliter, which is pretty much the highest possible natural
Wow.
levels you can get. And so I put together a protocol for this. And if anyone, we'll go through some of the strategies, but if anyone wants that full protocol, they can actually check that out at trtfree.com. I built out like an incredible resource for people to check that out, how I structured things. But if we look at the different strategies, I mean, supplements definitely can help. I'm a naturopath, so I love herbs. So Tonka-Ali, Fedosia agrestis, Shilajit, Cistanch, Pine Pollen. These are really powerful herbs that can help to facilitate an increase in testosterone.
And so they can just go to the store, go to Amazon and buy these herbs and take them separately if they want.
Well, this is where it gets a little bit, yeah. When it comes to sourcing particular ingredients, as I was mentioning to yourself before, that I've just manufactured my own supplement. We really need to make sure that these companies are doing the third party testing, to ensure potency and quality of the product. So many of the particular products that I recommend to my clients definitely have that quality certification.
Yeah, that is for sure. That is a really important and key point here, everybody, that not all supplements are created equal. And you've got to find brands that you can trust and know that what's actually in the bottle or in the pill is what is said on the label. So, yeah, that is true. Okay, well, we always hear, though, about exercise helping testosterone. So, is that the best route besides foods and herbs?
Yep. So that's a great point here is like the type of activity and exercise really matters. So selecting activities and exercises that require large large muscle groups to be highly explosive or like requires a lot of power output. So weightlifting is probably the very best way to maximize testosterone levels. So that's squatting, deadlifting, bench pressing, chin ups, um, any sort of activities that involve high power output. And then, second to that, we can also implement HIIT training. So, I mean, like short bursts, so high explosive activities with the short duration, followed by sufficient rest that can help with testosterone. There is one type of exercise that can actually have the opposite effect and can actually lower testosterone, and that is marathon training or very, very
Mm.
high. like long duration activities like cycling for 2 hours, for example.
Interesting. And is that because their cortisol is just high for so long, or what is that?
It's a highly stressful state to be exercising for that long duration, and it becomes a very catabolic state, which means it breaks down muscle tissue significantly. And so what happens during those activities is that, yeah, like you mentioned, that sympathetic nervous system is just staying elevated for way too long, and they're not actually able to balance back out into that parasympathetic state.
So is that the same for women who like every single day go do these aerobic classes at the gym?
I think there would definitely be a diminishing returns, a negative response that could happen. So, for example, if they're doing that every single day without adequate rest days, perhaps they can balance it out with like Pilates or yoga or something more lower intensity. And specifically, if they're not eating enough calories, that is a recipe for disaster, because that will insufficient calories for a prolonged period of time, as you would understand, can actually shut down the reproductive axis as well.
Which is so interesting because women who want to lose weight, a lot of them don't eat enough calories and are exercising too much. So then that messes with all of their hormones, correct?
Exactly. There's a concept that I learnt about at university called the female athlete triad, which is where they exercise a lot, they don't recover, and they don't eat enough food. And what happens is that they can literally lose their ability to ovulate, and they can also lose their period as well.
Well, and you hear about that with athletes and women. So that's interesting. Okay, so let me ask you this though about testosterone. I know the gut plays a huge role in progesterone, estrogen. Does gut health play a role in testosterone also?
So this is an interesting concept, and I love looking at the links between gut health and any sort of condition, because as a naturopath, that's all we ever talked about was gut health. So if we look at the gut specifically, there is a strong link between something known as endotoxin. So if endotoxin, which is a gram-negative bacteria that builds up in the gut from processed foods, alcohol, things that can damage the gut lining, there's actually a very strong link between how high endotoxin is, and the higher the endotoxin, the lower the testosterone. So there's actually a pathway there that I think a number of men don't really consider, and that could be definitely dampening testosterone production.
Oh, that is really interesting. And so, what are your tips for bettering that gut health?
Yep. So when it comes to optimizing gut health, obviously we want to be avoiding exposure to some of these foods and toxins, and avoiding alcohol completely. But in terms of like what we can do to rebuild and fortify the gut, there is one particular peptide that's extremely effective at doing this, and that's BPC 157. That particular peptide is a highly effective peptide at actually sealing the tight junctions in the gut. So it can actually help to, um, reverse that leaky gut that a number of people suffer from.
Interesting. Is that a peptide people can get in America?
Yeah, it's ubiquitous in the US. It's found in different peptide stores, and yeah, it's easy to find there.
Okay, that's good to know. All right, so I actually want to talk about women now, if that's okay, and testosterone, because like I said, I know a bunch of people that are taking testosterone that are women, but what is the role of testosterone in PCOS? Should people be taking it, not taking it? Does it help it?
Yeah, so PCOS is an interesting condition. What happens in that particular case is that, um, in those particular patients, what happens is they have something known as hyperandrogenism. So what happens is there's actually elevated levels of testosterone that are found in patients with PCOS. Now, the real question is, why is it elevated in the first place? And this is where it comes back to looking at insulin sensitivity. And I'm sure you've discussed this before. Um, the higher the insulin, the higher the conversion to that pathway there, that the ovaries can actually increase the production of androgens, specifically testosterone. So The goal in PCOS patients is to actually, number one, improve body insulin sensitivity. And so, what does that look like? It basically just means get healthy. Do your walks after your 10 to 15-minute walks after meals. Eat your protein first. Minimize refined sugars and carbohydrates. And so, what happens there is we see a reduction in insulin, and then we see also a progressive lowering of testosterone in these patients. Now, if we want to actually deliberately lower testosterone levels in women, there are a few herbs that do a fantastic job at supporting this pathway. The first one is pretty easy to find. It's actually mint. So peppermint or spearmint tea. That generally has a quite a good effect there. And then the other one is actually Romania. Now, if you look into traditional Chinese medicine, this particular herb is the most commonly found herb in all traditional Chinese medicine preparations. And this is me being a nerd. I used to go to Chinese medicine bookstores and read them after university. And I realized that this particular herbal extract called Romania glutinosa has a really beneficial effect in women that have PCOS.
That's really interesting. I actually have never heard of that before. And so, okay, let's go back to the insulin resistance though. So does obviously we know how that affects PCOS. So does insulin resistance so affect testosterone in men?
Yep. So that's an important distinguish. So if we look at insulin resistance can lower testosterone levels in men indirectly. And it's because what happens is in elevated levels of insulin can actually shut down that HPG axis, the hypothalamus pituitary gonadal axis. And so it's equally as important for men to maintain low levels of insulin year round. And I mean, when we look at low levels of insulin, I mean, when we're looking at a blood test, if they're doing a fasted blood test, their insulin score should be between 3 and 7. Anywhere in that sort of three to 7 is considered good and sufficient.
In reality, if they went to their doctor and got blood work done and they had insulin resistance, then most likely they've got some hormonal issues.
Very, very likely, yes.
Let's take a quick break to hear from our show sponsor. Get ready to unwrap just ingredients this holiday season. Starting November 26, you can save up to 25% off site-wide. Plus, get a free month's supply of probiotic complex with orders over 250. During Black Friday, we'll be launching 10 new products, including 5 new supplements like testosterone support, designed for men and women seeking to optimize testosterone levels, and our perimenopause support, designed to help manage more than over 50 possible perimenopause-related symptoms. Plus, we have new protein flavors, French vanilla, which I know you guys will love because it's what you've been asking for. A vanilla made without cinnamon or stevia leaf, and a new seasonal flavor, chocolate orange. We'll also be bringing back other seasonal favorites like eggnog protein and vanilla peppermint beauty products. Learn more about our new products and get additional sale details by joining our mailing list through the link in the show notes. And get ready to shop starting November 26. Happy holidays from Just Ingredients. Now back to the show. But what about all of these women in perimenopause? I feel
Hmm.
like people in perimenopause or menopause really have lower levels of testosterone. Is it just because of an age thing? Like it starts to drop at a certain age?
Yeah, so during perimenopause, testosterone does play a supportive role in managing symptoms and also helping to maintain quality of life. Now, testosterone levels do naturally decline with age, and in perimenopause, when women experience fluctuating estrogen and progesterone levels, this decrease can contribute to a range of symptoms. Now, when we're looking at the common symptom, which is like lacking energy and vitality, testosterone does help to support energy levels and also combat the fatigue that can accompany these hormonal shifts during perimenopause. So, um, the lower levels of testosterone can actually contribute to those feelings of tiredness, experiencing lower stamina, which can actually make those daily activities a lot more challenging.
Do you like testosterone replacement hormone replacement options? Like, is that a good thing for women?
So this is a great question. What I say with merging or managing like Western medicine versus natural medicine, I think there's a time and place for both modalities. And when it comes to like, for example, testosterone replacement for women, there's definitely going to be a cohort of the population or specific demographic that can highly benefit from testosterone replacement. However, if we look at that particular demographic, it would only be in the case where they've done sufficient blood testing. So they've had a comprehensive blood work completed by their primary care physician. And they've also had their other factors analyzed. So looking at lifestyle, have they dialed in all the other areas? And if they've tried absolutely everything naturally, then that's when I think, you know, testosterone replacement can be highly beneficial.
Is there a point though that if they take testosterone, they can take too much and then they're high in testosterone?
Exactly. So what can happen is because testosterone is something called androgenic, so meaning that can actually cause virilization. And so if a woman's taking testosterone, they need to be very careful that it's not going to lead to side effects, which is unlikely to occur if you're doing things naturally. So it's more likely to occur if you're doing it synthetically. So that can be excess hair growth in places that they don't want hair growth. It can potentially deepen voice as well if they're taking too high of a dosage. And it can also just lead to physical changes in their body. So, but potentially even coming across and looking more masculine as well.
Interesting. Okay, so I've heard from some women that they get on testosterone, they have like a pellet, and then all of a sudden they are so witchy. Like it just makes them, really angry and moody like that. And so is obviously that's got to be a side effect of too much testosterone, I'm assuming.
Yeah. So what can happen is like when we're introducing an exogenous hormone, it can actually throw out the balance of other hormones and lead to like something characterized like virilization, which can definitely change personality. Just like what we see with the oral contraceptive pill, the OCP, that can change a woman's um, preference for certain men. Like they've seen,
Mm.
I'm sure you've seen the studies where the contraceptive pill can actually influence what she's looking for in a man and also perceived level of attraction as well. So the same would occur with testosterone. It can shift a woman's, personality as well.
That is so interesting. And so then I'm wondering, well, what's the pro of going on it then? Because I know people in perimenopause who love it, that swear by it, but then we've got the others that hate it. So I guess it's just comes down to individual needs?
Yeah, it definitely goals as well. Like for example, if they're trying to, um, you know, they're competing in a sport that requires them to be performing at a very, very high level. That's where testosterone replacement can actually support. If they've got really high level fitness goals, obviously testosterone is going to be helpful for that. But again, like the side effects, they need to be considered as well.
Okay, so let's talk about creams versus pellets. What's the difference and why are doctors offering both?
Yeah. So when it comes to different ways that we can like enter testosterone into the human body, there's different types. Obviously, we've got the creams, the pellets. So the creams are a lot easier. They're applied topically, usually in the inner wrists or inner thighs or forearms, and that can be absorbed through the skin. So that's typically done daily. And so one thing just to point out here is that it's non-invasive. It's pretty easy to apply, and there's lower risk of excessive hormonal buildup. But the problem is that it can actually rub off, it can actually the cream can actually accidentally rub off even onto other people if you're not careful. And so that's something to keep a lookout for. And then if we look at the pellets, so the pellets are interesting. They're longer lasting solution. So that means that they can maintain consistent hormone levels, but unfortunately, they involve an invasive procedure and are less flexible once inserted. So um, it's definitely an important point to consider if they're looking at, boosting testosterone.
Too low of testosterone can be dangerous to the health, right? Because I know someone who just had multiple pellets put in, and his doctor was very afraid of how low his testosterone was, of what that would do to his health.
Definitely. So if we're looking at some of the effects, bone mineral density is an important factor. So if testosterone levels are too low, then what can happen is the bones can become more brittle and frail, and you're more likely to have a fracture or a bone sort of dislocation, things like that. So that's where it's extremely important as well.
Okay, so I want to ask you, what is your thought on nootropics? Do they play a role in testosterone and keeping those levels good?
Nootropics is a very very big passionate field that I'm highly highly excited about. Um, Nootropics specifically are referring to compounds, either natural or synthetic, that can improve cognitive function. So that can be memory, focus, alertness, attention. And so there is a pretty strong link between specific neurotransmitters and testosterone production. Now, a perfect example of this would be antidepressants. So, if we're looking at antidepressants, specifically the ones that increase serotonin, so these are the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, the SSRIs. If we look at the literature, these SSRIs actually can lower testosterone levels in men. And this is why,
Interesting.
yeah, and this is why I'm not a big fan of specifically increasing serotonin levels in men, because it can actually put the handbrakes on testosterone production. If, on the other hand, we boost dopamine levels through nootropics, that can actually increase testosterone production. Okay? So it can have the opposite effect as well.
Interesting. Well, then what are you taking to increase that dopamine?
Yeah, so that's where I discovered a particular herb from Brazil, and this is actually going to be the very first product that I released to my audience. And a number of people have no idea about this particular herb because it's primarily found in the Amazonian jungle and the rainforest there. So it's a particular herb called catwaba. Now, catwaba has been used by various indigenous tribes for centuries, and they're particularly using it for increasing blood flow, improving mood, and also as an aphrodisiac. So hopefully, by the time this podcast is released, if people want to check out that catwaba, it'll be released under the brand name called In Before, INB4. So if they search INB4 catwaba, which is spelled CATUABA, they can check that out as a dopamine boosting herb.
Interesting. So is the In Before your brand?
Yeah, so we're launching. That's our brand name In Before, and the name is specifically to try and demonstrate that we're releasing ingredients and products in before everyone else. So we were the first in. You know.
Oh, that's interesting. That's a strategic good name. Good job. Okay, so besides nootropics, I've heard you talk about some sleep hacks that could help support hormone production. What are those?
Yeah, so sleep is incredibly important when we're looking at optimizing general health. So I would definitely say light exposure is going to have a dramatic effect on general sleep quality. So specifically, what I've actually done in my entire apartment is I've replaced all of the globes in my apartment to a LED adjustable. You can change the different color. So what happens is after 6:30 p.m. at night, all of the lights in my entire apartment go to red, which means that it's mimicking the sun going down, and that particular effect with the red light exposure can help the body to naturally increase a hormone called melatonin. Now, if we look at melatonin, blue light and white light suppresses melatonin. So it actually lowers melatonin. So the best thing that we can do is to shift the lighting in our environment at nighttime, or you can wear those blue light blocking glasses as well, which I also have um, about 2 to 3 hours before bed, and that can have a dramatic um, improvement on sleep quality as well.
So we should have said this before. Terrible sleep or not enough sleep or poor quality sleep can affect all the hormone levels. I mean, progesterone, estrogen, and testosterone, correct?
Absolutely, and also insulin as well. So poor sleep equals higher fasting insulin, and in fact, if we sleep not long enough and poor quality, that can make a normal human respond to carbohydrates as if they are a pre-diabetic. So it can turn food that you love into food that will make you fat, basically.
We didn't talk about this one, but women quite often will tell me, well, I went on testosterone because I had stubborn weight gain and the testosterone helped the weight come off. Is that true?
Yeah, so testosterone can actually have a beneficial effect on weight loss. Um, if we look at like the particular pathway there, well, testosterone increases something known as thermogenesis. So it can actually increase like the burning of calories as the burning of sort of energy substrates. And then also, if we look at muscle growth, well, we know that testosterone helps to build muscle and increase muscle growth. The more muscle we can build, the more calories that we burn at rest, meaning that testosterone can actually help to facilitate fat loss as well.
Okay, so these women that are taking testosterone, I know a lot of their doctors will also put them on DIM at the same time. And why is that?
Yeah, so DIM is an interesting one. So DIM, which is the compound that's sort of found in cruciferous vegetables, has a positive effect on protecting the body from converting excess testosterone into estrogen. So it can have a balancing effect on that conversion, so testosterone into estrogen. So it can actually block that enzyme. So this is usually an effect that some doctors note that is a beneficial effect. In my opinion, I prefer to use something called calcium D-glucarate. That particular nutrient is a lot more effective at flushing out excess estrogen. And a number of women that I've worked with, when we looked at their blood work and their goal is fat loss, I put them on a protocol that included calcium D-glucarate at a dosage of around 250 to 500 milligrams per day. After 2 weeks, they've come back to me and they've said they've dropped a lot of water retention. So they're not as like puffy. So that was a pretty cool benefit.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, so if women or men are listening to this and women are like, oh, yeah, I'm tired all the time, I've got the stubborn weight gain, maybe I'm low in testosterone, is there an ideal range that they should be looking for with their blood work?
Yeah, so that's an important point. Um, with testosterone and with a lot of these hormones, there's obviously going to be a sweet spot and there's like an optimal zone. Um, However, it's important to emphasize that this sweet spot will differ from individual to individual. And so there isn't a perfect spot. But if we're looking at the typical normal range, if we're looking at trying to achieve that optimal zone, it should be between 50 to 70 nanograms per deciliter for total testosterone. So that's usually like a pretty good sweet spot. And that's obviously a blood test that is done fasted in the morning
For men or for women?
for women.
And then what about men?
Well, for men, they would, a lot of different doctors have different opinions. I like men to be on the very, very, very high side. So anything from 800 to 1200. So 800 nanograms per deciliter all the way up to 1,200.
Okay, that's good to know. So I have one other question for you about testosterone. Is it true that once you're on testosterone, you're on it for the rest of your life, or is that a myth?
So it is possible to take testosterone and then come off it by using some other medications such as HCG, and potentially clomiphene. So there is a way to recover, but depending upon how long you've been on testosterone and the dosage that you've been on, it can take months and months to recover. And when we're looking at fertility, fertility can take a very, very long time to restore as well. So most guys that go on TRT, when they go on TRT, they're usually committing to it for life. It's usually like a lifelong commitment, which can be a bit annoying if if you're traveling, going on holidays, you have to bring syringes and all that sort of stuff. Can be a bit of a nuisance.
So is it the same for women that once they commit, it's life?
In their case, it's pretty similar in that regard, but it's less likely because they're using much lower dosages as well.
Okay. So these 20-year-olds, because I know a bunch of 20-year-olds that have low testosterone, that seems way too early to start hormone replacement therapy. So you suggest for them to get their life in order, right?
My suggestion is for those guys to go on trtfree.com and do the full natural protocol. That is the single best resource for guys that want to boost testosterone levels naturally from the ages of 18 to 65. Like that is the best resource. And if guys say they've tried everything, I can almost guarantee you that they haven't tried everything. They haven't tried a lot of the different supplements and protocols that I've put into that protocol.
So I'm assuming this protocol is talks about sleep and exercise and stress and supplements and food and herbs and all the things that we've talked about today.
Exactly, the full package. It's leaving no stone unturned, and it's a precious resource that I hope can benefit. Well, it's already benefited thousands of men around the world. But at this point in time, we're recording this podcast in 2024. If we don't take action now, in 30 to 40 years from now, most men in the Western world will be infertile. And that is not a good thing.
That is I know it's crazy to me, and I've read the stats how, um, 50 years ago, the 70-year-old men had the same level of sperm counts as, like, our 20-year-olds do today, which is crazy.
Hmm. Yep. And that's the quote that I like to use is that um, you're not the man your grandfather was. That's the quote.
Mm, that is good. And I know we've talked about it all, but if you were to pinpoint one thing, it's not the stress or the sleep or the nutrient deficiencies, or it's all of it, or it's just that, like you said, there's endocrine disruptors everywhere.
Yeah, I'd say the stealth one would be that polyester underwear. I've spoken to a number of guys and they just had no idea about that effect. And I told them to check what they're wearing and they're just like they couldn't believe that their underwear was made from polyester. So you're better off choosing like bamboo, cotton. These are better materials.
I'm so fascinated that that's your number one thing you would tell guys. So that's actually really good to know. I'm gonna go on a campaign of advertising, Better Choice men's underwear. But, okay, so that underwear, though, could play a role in the women as well, just not as much so maybe.
Yeah, so that's also an important point. They need to make sure that they're selecting good quality material as well, because um, the polyester, what happens is when it rubs up against the skin, it actually creates electrostatic shocks and charges. So, like, when you've taken off a t-shirt that's like made of polyester, you take it off and it's like it does the static shocks. And
Mhm.
if you do it in the dark, you can actually see the little sparks.
Mhm.
Um, that is not a good sign. Like that means that that's actually happening like in your down in your reproductive areas. So that's an important thing to consider. And if we're looking at that effect, that is what's causing the heating of the testes. So it's that during the day, obviously, men can't really notice it or hear it or feel it, but it's micro amounts of static shocks that's happening to the testes, and it's the micro amounts of those electrostatic shocks that are causing that micro heat. You know,
Well, that's really good to know. Well, you have answered so many questions, and a lot of these questions were ones that my followers submitted that they wanted to know. So, thank you so much for taking the time to answer all of these things. Before we end, will you just tell my listeners where they can learn more from you?
sure, yeah, and I appreciate the opportunity, Carolyn. It was a pleasure chatting, and it's always fun to connect with other health educators. So people want to connect with me. They can check me out at boostyourbiology.com. So boostyourbiology.com. Otherwise, they can search my name on Instagram, Lucas, Lucas, surname Aoun.
And you guys, he is a great resource on Instagram. You will learn so much. You are a great follow. So, thank you for always providing so much free information out there. And I always close my podcast episodes by asking everybody what they have found to be the best ingredient in life. What would you say it is?
Well, if we look at it like metaphorically, metaphorically speaking, instead of a particular herbal ingredient that I've mentioned, that one that I mentioned before, catwaba, I would say metaphorically speaking, for me, it would be purpose.
Mm.
That's probably the number one ingredient for me. Having a sense of purpose creates unlimited energy. It creates a spark, not a polyester spark, but a spark in the heart, that wakes me up every day and gives me that motivation, and discipline. So definitely having a sense of purpose. For me, that purpose is very obvious. It's to showcase new and novel health information to the world, and to impact millions of people worldwide.
Ooh, I love that. And I love that you said purpose is unlimited energy. That's a profound one to think about. Well, again, listeners, go give him a follow. Like I said, you will learn so much information. You will enjoy following him. Thank you, Lucas, again for being here and taking the time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Carolyn, and it was a pleasure chatting.
Thank you so much for listening. Remember to subscribe to the Just Ingredients podcast to learn more about your health and good ingredients to life. Plus, get daily tips at just.ingredients on Instagram.